priests were held in very high esteem by the local people because the local pastor, unlike the bishop, was always there. He was always there to baptize your children, always there to marry them, always there if you needed the sacraments in the middle of the night, they would come. So they did what they were supposed to do. Plus the fact, okay, Burke would say, look, I agree with you guys, you're right. Peasant religion is superstitious. It really holds them back in some instances. Do you honestly think that you can invent something new and just replace everything that's familiar to them overnight, just like that? You honestly think you can do that? Something similar happened in China after the communists took over in 1949 under Mao Zedong. Because the Chinese communists waged this absolutely relentless war against Confucianism. Confucius, of course, is the age-old wise man of China, but the communists, oh, no. Confucius, bad. The party, good. Get rid of that stupid old guy. I mean, no, you don't need something like that. So, guess what happened? I mean, the peasants would say, yes, well, with the party. Are they gone? Okay, let's get out the picture of the wise man again. I mean, it just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. So yes, Burke says you're right. You're absolutely right. Peasants are superstitious. You've got to be out of your mind if you think they're going to go for something like this. You just don't know the psychology of rural peasants and how tenacious they cling to things like that they hold sacred. It's probably why Stalin, the Soviet leader during World War II, all of a sudden hauled the Russian Orthodox patriarch out of a prison camp in Siberia, and they suddenly have all these photo ops with him and this poor 81-year-old man, and Stalin saying things like, and may God help us in our path. What? Hold it? This is the guy who found the League of the Militant Atheists. I mean, because communism was officially atheist. Severe persecutions, particularly of Russian Orthodoxy. All of a sudden, Stalin is saying, yeah.
So, am I right that, like, true communism never actually, atheists never actually...
Oh, no, it's absolutely deadly good. It must be. I mean, at least Marxists, yeah. I mean, that's why
They don't have a government, Marxists, right? There's no government written into
Marx is next up. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Why did Stalin do that, though? He said, you know, let's face it, we're in a war, and I know Russian peasants. They will fight for Holy Mother Russia and for God much more fiercely than they will for communism. Because the party was officially militantly atheist. It's a sad story, but like all these great Russian Orthodox churches, like the altar area would be turned into a brothel or a bathroom or a stable. Priests arrested and shot and everything. But all of a sudden, we need to defeat Hitler. And I know what those peasant yokels will fight for, and it's God. They won't fight for the party or Marxism, Leninism nearly as fiercely. Stalin knew that, even as he wanted to get rid of it, because it was an alternate competing belief system. So Burke died kind of a lonely and despised man. He had these absolutely uncanny, accurate predictions about the French Revolution. He said, well, you know, the way things are going here, I can see one outcome for this. France is going to wind up as a military dictatorship. Because sooner or later, you're going to need some kind of order to all this chaos. He predicted the terror. He said there's going to be a period of prolonged violence, bloodshed, many lives lost. And sooner or later, there's going to be a military dictator who takes over. Well, in 1799, there was this little chap who called himself First Consul of the Republic. I think his name was Napoleon Bonaparte, maybe. He kind of looks like a military dictator, exactly as Burke had predicted. Mr. Glegg.
So, just a question. Now, he used religion to get people to join the army so that they would.
Well, Stalin did. Yeah.
Right, Stalin did this so that they could defeat Hitler. Wouldn't Hitler have never successfully invaded Russia either way? Because, as seen with Napoleon, he didn't even have to.
Oh yeah, but that assumes
the army.
That assumes you know in advance what's going to happen. Hitler came within half an inch of succeeding. I mean, it was a very close thing.
Oh, it wasn't even that. Winter was what killed the invasion of
That helped, but that's,
like Napoleon told me.
well, Napoleon actually got further than Hitler because he captured Moscow. Hitler never did that. He got to the suburbs, but still, in either case, you can only say that looking back. You can't know at the time what the future holds. And so Stalin figured, since we're in a fight for our lives, that's what they'll fight for, much more than they will for Marxism, Leninism. So anyway, as I said, Burke is kind of a sourpuss because he's the guy, if you go on a credit card binge, he's the guy who says, now, wait a minute, what? Look at all this new stuff I've got. Well, you do realize that you're going to get a statement in the mail next month that expects you to pay for it, right? Were you aware of that? No, but what's the big deal? I'm having fun. He is, okay, look, hold it. How is this going to work or is this not going to work? Let's not rush into things. He's not anti-change at all. I mean, as I said, he was very much in favor of what the Americans were doing because he thought it was much more consistent with British parliamentary traditions. He is definitely anti-utopian. And the leaders of the French Revolution seemed to be utopians because they believed that they could create something perfect. Not only better, perfect. And he simply thought, you guys must be dreaming. You really must. You think overnight you can completely tear down society as it has existed without any costs, any pain, and you can simply replace it with something completely different and nobody's going to notice. You just are dreamers. So as I said, he's not going to fill you up. He doesn't have any positive plan. He doesn't say this is the type of government that everybody ought to have. He asks, what is the best you can do within the limits of where you are? It's not so much where you want to go, it's where you are. There may be ways to get out of there, but you better think long and hard about it before you disrupt things that people are accustomed to. Any questions or thoughts? As I said, he's not a very cheerful guy. He died a broken man. He was absolutely right. But he was considered kind of an old fogey. A lot of people were just confident that the French Revolution heralded a new dawn and good things were happening all over. He's remembered much more now for being right about everything than at the time when he was thought simply to be behind the times. Any questions before we move to the man sometimes called the least funny of the Marx brothers, namely Karl Marx? I'm talking about Groucho, Chico, Harpo, Gummo, Zebbo. You see, I got all five of them. I think there was one movie in which they all appeared. If they had Italianized Marx's name and made him Carlo, boy, they would have had the most perfect straight man for that routine. I mean, he was the guy who got all the pies and rotten tomatoes and everything like that. I'm talking about none other than the absolutely ubiquitous, the windbag, the worshipped, the unavoidable Karl Marx. Who in appearance looks a lot like the German composer Johannes Brahms. They both had big bushy beards. They both could be rather blunt and hot-tempered. Brahms used to be invited to perform at soirees, and he would leave by saying, I trust there's no one here this evening that I have failed to offend. That was probably the case. Marx was very argumentative, which could make dealing with him very difficult because he also really liked garlic. And, if he really got agitated, things could get a bit, it does. His principal works include the communist Manifesto, probably his best known work, but you got to read a lot more of him if you want to understand him. The German ideology. Let's see, what else shall I put up here? The critique of political economy. Class struggles in France. Marx's magnum opus, though, is, I'll put it in the German title, Das Kapital, Capital, which came out in 4 volumes. Over a period of nearly 30 years. The reason I said that Marx, or I should say here, that sometimes reading him can be a cure for insomnia, because if you're familiar with German, you know that there's basically 2 ways that you can write it. One style, used by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, not Nietzsche, please, Nietzsche. It's very much like English. It's a subject, verb, and a predicate, and the sentences are pretty short. There's another way to write German, which even native speakers find, oh my God. The people I used to work with say, ach du liebe, noch ein Professor. Oh my God, another professor. You know, because they would read this stuff and think, how in the hell do these guys write it? Because one sentence could be like a page and a half long. The auxiliary verb comes at the beginning, and then all the participial parts of the verb line up at the end of the sentence. German also has definite articles for nouns. Der, die, and das, depending, that's a masculine, feminine, and neuter. English, we just use the for all 3 of them. But in German, like I can say, for this das Buch, I can put a participial phrase or a phrase in between the article and the book. I can say, das von mir gelesenes Buch, the book which I am reading, but in German it translates literally, the book, the read by me book. That's how it's expressed in German. Das Buch, and then all this stuff in between. It takes some getting used to. Marx very much writes in that very rarefied academic German style. So does Immanuel Kant, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Max Weber, Ferdinand Tönnies. I mean, as I said, my colleagues, I had to speak German most of the time in the deli that I worked in. And they would look at it and say, well, maybe you should translate it into English. I could probably understand it better. So if you're reading an English translation of Das Kapital, you often have to break one of Marx's German sentences up into about 4 or 5 English sentences. You just can't express yourself that way in English. So as I said, it's a joke even among native speakers. I think there was a fellow who used to teach up at Boston University whose father emigrated from Germany. His name, I think, was Brian Eschleman. And he grew up here, but his father, of course, came from Germany. And when he read the German philosopher Hegel in English translation, he said, now I understand him for the first time, even though German was his native language. So I'm not busting on Germans, I'm just talking about a particular type of way of writing the language that a number of them also laugh about. Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Noble. So Marx was born in Trier, Germany. He was born into an assimilated German Jewish family. By assimilated, I mean that they were Enlightenment Jews. They did not take Judaism any more seriously than they did Christianity. They were very prosperous. His father owned a big department store, and he was pretty wealthy. But anyway, the parents decided, well, what the hell? We may as well decide to be Lutherans, because then we can be total Germans. We won't have any disabilities. If you lived in that part of Germany at the time, if you were Jewish or Catholic, it was a Lutheran area, so there would be legal limitations on what you could do. So the fact that Marx's dad decided to convert to Lutheranism just for convenience, that's just fun. Because that Marx had a Protestant upbringing. He was descended from a number of very distinguished German rabbis. He later, of course, as I said, became a militant atheist who also became rather anti-Semitic. He wasn't terribly kind to his forefathers in Judaism, although any religion, as far as he was concerned, was complete garbage. He had a rather prosperous upbringing and family life. He went to the very best German universities, which were probably the best in the world at the time. He, by the time he was 23, earned that gift of Germany to the rest of the world, the PhD degree, which no one needs and everyone decides to get. I think at that time Marx really had to earn his. He did a dissertation on the difference in the philosophy of nature between Democritus and Epicurus, one Greek and one Roman. Marx, of course, knew his Greek and Latin cold. He also wrote in English, in French. I think he may have written something in Italian. He was learning Russian late in his life so he could follow peasant uprisings in eastern Siberia. He spent a lot of his time on the run because he was involved frequently with radical politics in Germany and in France. So he and the German composer Richard Wagner both got kicked out of the country for political reasons. Marx was on the political left and Wagner was on the political right. Wagner came back. Marx then went to France where he published some stuff in French. He spent most of his creative life in England. He's buried there in Highgate Cemetery in London. Some people still make pilgrimages to his grave every year. Because I think there's something, in full disclosure, I ought to tell you something about me and Marx. I usually don't get very personal, but I think I have to do this. Are you ready? I'm not a Marxist. I think I ought to tell you that. I mean, I don't think you are educated unless you read Marx, and because he's so influential. I mean, about 2/3 of the world at one time were supposedly governed in the name of Marx's ideas. You used to see pictures, statues, busts, cities named after Karl Marx. I mean, the guy's influence is really big time. The reason I say I'm not a Marxist is because I think you can read him and learn from him. I think you can, even if you don't agree with him, as some people don't, you ought to read him just because he is so influential. For me, however, unlike many of my undergraduate peers back in the middle 1960s, when I was in college, I do not believe that Marx is a unique source of truth the way they did. I mean, it was kind of like the approach some people take to the Bible. Oh, wait, I got the answer. Ah, there it is, right there. That solves that problem. Wait, let's see what Marx says. That Marx has spoken. That's the end of it. I could never take that approach to it. And so you should read him. You will learn from him. You might get mad at him. So I'm simply telling you that there are people, even now, who would object very strongly to the way I teach Marx because they don't think that he is a unique source of truth. Mr. Glick.
Now, in Communist Manifesto and any of the other ones that he wrote, basically, they're all very similar to his idea of written in Communist Manifesto, all basically saying there's going to be a bourgeoisie uprising. Similar ideas.
Well, the Communist Manifesto, you start with that, but I mean, Das Kapitol is the work you really want, because that was written much later.
with that, in either of those, do you actually have a government that quote unquote exists?
Yes, of course. You have government, let me address the question by continuing, because I have to address all of these things. Marx acknowledges the existence of government. He also predicts the end of it. But in the meantime,
There shouldn't be.
pardon me?
Because he doesn't believe there. He only really is pushing the economic system of capitalism.
Hold those thoughts. We're going to get there, I promise you. Marx himself, as I said, most of his creative years were spent in England. He had a friend who was another German expatriate, Friedrich Engels. I think Engels is about, oops. I don't know for sure. Check it out after class. I think that's approximately his dates. Engels was also an expatriate German living in England. The interesting thing is, he lived there because his English cousins owned a huge textile mill. And so Engels despised capitalism, but was a very wealthy capitalist. Pardon?
As many of your most wonderful people against capitalism.
Yeah, I mean,
seem to be.
what you call it, Occupy Wall Street had lots and lots of billionaires in it. So, I mean, go figure. It's an interesting
It's irony.
bit of psychology. Anyway, Marx himself never really held a job in his life. He made a little money on his own when he wrote some newspaper articles for some New York City papers in the 1850s. But otherwise, he was really dependent on Engels for support. He married a girl he had known since they were children. His wife's name was Jenny. And funny thing, another bit of irony about Marx is that no matter how poor the Marx household got, and sometimes it was pretty poor, they always had domestic servants. Now in Victorian England, why is that so important? Remember, that's when he lived there. Yeah.
It was a showing of richness. It was a class. It was basically showing a class. It was creating the actual term for it now off the top of my head. It's basically showing what class you belong to.
Yeah.
Servants are a status symbol.
Oh, very much. It was the divide between people who were respectable and those who were not. If you had servants, you were respectable. If you did not, well, then you're of the servant class, the working class. Now, supposedly, Marx himself absolutely hated, despised class distinctions. He himself always insisted, absolutely never forget, don't fail to address him as Herr Doktor. Ich heiße Herr Dr. Marx und vergessen Sie das nicht. I'm Herr Dr. Marx, don't you forget it. That's also, that kind of a title is very much tied to class structure. I'm not just some ordinary working stiff, etc., etc. Marx absolutely never let you know, forget that he was Herr Dr. Marx. I mean, Herr is a way in Germany to now saying Sir, Mr. It was originally associated with aristocratic titles. Certainly, and I'll take care. See you next time. In Marx's day, and even now in Germany, you would address me in class as Herr. I mean, we simply don't fail to do that. We don't have that kind of polite form of address in English. Marx, as I said, was really a stickler about it. I mean, all the titles, everything like that. And the Marxists, as I said, always had household servants, even though they were often quite incompetent. Marx himself, and here's another Victorian euphemism, had what was called a kept woman, which is a polite way of saying what?
Wife.
Pardon me?
Wife.
Not a wife. Yeah.
That's mistress.
Yeah, mistress. A little bit of activity on the side, you could say. Funny thing is that in communist countries, until the day they collapsed, you did never ever breathe a word of that. They knew it, but Marx, for some reason, had to be superhuman, squeaky clean. You just never ever mentioned that he had these ordinary human failings. You might say, well, what hypocrisy? Well, yeah, that's typical Victorianism, isn't it? Of course, lots of people were doing it, but we just don't admit it. We act as if it doesn't exist. Well, Marx is the guy who was supposedly going to lead a rebellion against all that, and yet he conformed to it so tightly. So, as I said, his life is filled with all of these ironies. He was almost never with his family because he spent 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock in the evening, 6 days a week, because the British Museum Library was closed on Sundays, which no doubt irritated him a great deal. But he was working on his researches, writing Das Kapitol. In the process, he managed to give himself a damn good case of hemorrhoids, sitting in uncomfortable chairs all the time. I think that made him even angrier with capitalists because, oh my God, it's because of them that I have to sit or not punish them. Now, I happen to think that if there had been that substance you can buy over the counter at drugstores, Preparation H, and Marx had gotten some relief, maybe he would have been easier on capitalism. I can't possibly say. I call it the Preparation H theory of history. We'll never know. In any case, he was just a rather bilious character, extremely dogmatic, not an easy guy to argue with. At the so-called First International, it was supposed to be a meeting of working men, but it was actually of a bunch of eggheads. Working class people were conspicuous by their absence. It was in London in 1864. A lot of people came away really kind of disillusioned. It's with this guy, Marx. He is so doctrinaire, so dogmatic, so positively authoritarian. It's my way or the highway. The Russian anarchist, maybe you've heard of this guy, Mikhail Bakunin, Frenchman who had similar views, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. They both said, wow, this guy is just so incredibly authoritarian, so absolutely strict about this is it, I have the answer. There's just nothing to talk about. All right, well, let's take a look at Marx's ideas. I had intended to bring my copy of the Communist Manifesto, so we'll do that next time, because there's a few choice passages that I think it would help us to hear quoted. For Marx, there is exactly one thing in all of human history that causes things to rise, fall, and change. One single thing. One thing only. And that is class conflict. Class conflict. And by that, I don't mean that you're trying to select your courses for next semester and you have two great ones at the same time. I know that's also a class conflict, but that's not what I have in mind. What does Marx mean, do you think, by class conflict? Because that's the only thing that matters in human history. And by the way, he's talking about all human societies everywhere. It's not simply in England, it's not simply capitalism, it's all of human history.
Tensions between the distribution of wealth across groups of people in society.
Exactly. Class conflict is pervasive in all human societies. Between those who control wealth and its production versus those who want to control it. Haves versus have-nots. All of